Chapter 14. The Civilization of Ponus. For approximately 100,000 years, humans in the Andromeda Galaxy were considered extinct. But this was not entirely true. A small population who, according to several sources, had once been slaves to an alien race, still existed on a desert planet called Ponus on the edge of the Andromeda Galaxy. Their extraterrestrial masters had long ago and for unknown reasons abandoned their world, allowing the humans to continue living independently. However, without access to technology, these humans were nothing more than primitive barbarians trying to survive at the lowest level of culture. Nevertheless, they managed to avoid extinction over the following tens of thousands of years. This shows once again, Venerable Master, how incredibly tough and persistent the human race is. There are several pictorial representations that show the people of Ponus as desert nomads clad in thick suits. Later depictions provide more insight into their anatomy and appearance. Many of the people were very tall and very gaunt. Most had light brown or slightly ochre-colored skin, but some also had a pale, almost pinkish skin. The skull shapes of the people of Ponus were significant, as quite a few had pointed posterior heads and very long, narrow noses. Hair colors varied from blonde to black. Unfortunately, many image files are no longer accessible or too blurry to be properly evaluated. However, we should of course be thankful for the information we still have about these ancient eras. Without the excavated data crystal, mankind's history would probably have been forgotten forever. You have said this again and again, Venerable Master, and this is absolutely correct. Thus, it took about 70,000 years for the humans of Ponus, after the usual internal wars and struggles, to develop nation states and even a rudimentary industrial civilization. At some point, they sent out radio signals into the void of space, which led to an extraterrestrial race becoming aware of their world. The aliens came and made contact with the humans. They were friendly and even helped them to understand the secrets of space travel. Perhaps they only wanted to colonize the planet, but eventually they disappeared again in the vastness of space. Over the next millennia, the people of Ponus evolved and began traveling to nearby solar systems in primitive spaceships. On one world, they encountered members of a race also originally from the Milky Way. This race must have been a splinter of the once extremely powerful Alban. They were very human-like beings with a history that stretched back far into the depths of time. The Alban were friendly and showed the humans the wonders of their ancient technology, which must have been a fantastic experience for them. Eventually, they promised to guide the humans on their journey to the stars. Centuries passed, and under the mentorship of the Alban, a star empire grew and continued to expand. Although the Elbon were extremely clever and wise, they were few in number, while the human population was rapidly growing. This led to tensions that eventually ended in war. The humans, now numerically superior, won the battle and finally banned the Alban from their empire and sent them into exile. A short text fragment described the events like this. The false friends who were arrogant and condescending to us humans were defeated in several battles and thrown into the dust. Mental finder Lord Mika and his successor Otto without soul fear ordered that they were no longer allowed to enter the worlds of the Ponus people. Without the Alban, but with access to the fruits of their ancient and wondrous technology, humans extended purposefully across the Sama spiral arm of the Andromeda galaxy over the next 3 millennia. They also explored the network of warp tunnels which the Alban had told them about long ago. This arcane marvel, created by unknown builders, fascinated the humans so much that they traveled it extensively, trying to uncover its secrets. The humans who originally came from the planet Ponus had survived for millennia under harsh and deadly conditions. Once little more than primitive desert barbarians, they eventually became star-faring people. The contact with the mysterious Alban changed everything for the people of Ponus. For a long time the Alban were wise advisors and friends, until the humans declared them enemies and traitors, and a bloody war broke out. This picture shows an Alban visitor, Venerable Master. A couple of human colonists in bizarre-looking exosuits on a conquered Alban planet. Most of the records relating to the war between the Ponus civilization and the Alban are no longer decipherable. Here, too, data rot was the main problem for the Archeo mentors. Chapter 15. A Song of Rise and Fall. The constant advance into realms beyond the material and the growing greed for power and pleasure within the Star Empire ultimately led to creatures from the other side of reality once again being attracted to the civilization of Ponus. Many people joined strange cults or worshipped destructive ideologies which increasingly threatened the stability of the empire. A culture of strict rationality and genetic interventions was intended to make people immune to their own spiritual decline, and for a time this strategy seems to have been successful. However, the people of Ponus did not stop traveling through the network of warp tunnels. They actually intensified their travels and one day even succeeded in establishing bases in other galaxies. We named one city on a planet in a galaxy without a name after a brave starfarer Rillan. We also saw many other places far away from home. Only a very few chronicles have remained with names of rulers or explorers of this era, Venerable Master. Very often data rot is the cause of a disruption in the quantum cloud, but you know that yourself. Nevertheless, the achievements of the people of Ponos were enormous, and once again it was fascinating to witness how such an advanced race could emerge from a once primitive planet. Millennia passed, marked by relative peace and continued technological advancement. Gradually, however, a shadow of general depression and lethargy descended upon the civilization of Ponos. One source text mentions that a ruler named Brightface Maxo Kogas failed in his attempt to restore happiness to the people of Ponos. Unfortunately, no further information is available. The members of the upper classes began to retreat to specially terraformed garden worlds where they lived lives of hedonistic philosophizing. Achieving a perfect harmony became the sole goal in life for many of them, which meant that the vitality of their star empire gradually diminished over time. The next era appears to have been one of omnipresent depression and later even outright despair, as the few records we have from this time suggest. Billions of people had lost their sense of purpose in life, and mass suicides and autoimmune epidemics with devastating consequences occurred. At this point, we can only speculate as to whether this was due to an excessive abundance of material goods, spiritual disorientation, or other causes. Ultimately, the once mighty civilization of Ponos collapsed without external influence over the course of the next 2000 years. We have found a text fragment which content does not need to be commented. When we have everything, we know in the end that there is no sense in our existence. Space is as black as our souls. We have been singing songs of joy since the time of the Thinker or Kill, but now our voices are weak, and no joy has ever returned. The final end of the crumbling Ponos civilization came with the invasion of a warlike alien race that plundered and devastated its core planets. Sources suggest that the attackers must have been the descendants of the Grushlogs, an alien species widespread throughout the Milky Way. Apparently, these green-skinned creatures had already reached the Zama spiral arm of the Andromeda galaxy by this time. After the war, the shattered civilization of Ponos was a landscape of ruins. Wealthy members of the upper class who had already completely fled into virtual realities still lived on a few hidden garden worlds, but they died out over time. Apart from them, only tiny populations of humans remained on a series of destroyed planets. With few exceptions, these were the descendants of colonists. Upon closer analysis, the culture of Ponos was the only advanced human civilization that perished primarily from its own weariness with life. This kind of demise was even more tragic. Is it not, Venerable Master? Another depiction of the warp horrors or warp demons. These terrifying entities were also described several times by the spacefarers of the Ponus civilization. These otherworldly creatures are said to have even attacked and destroyed spaceships. Pain Faces were desperate individuals who took extreme measures to overcome their inner emptiness. They had themselves connected to machines that gave them constant electric shocks. Pain Faces were often artistically depicted in the later phase of the Ponus civilization, as this stone relief shows. A high-ranking post-Grushlok warrior with implanted tusks. Tribes of these warlike aliens had left their home galaxy to spread war and terror on the Andromeda Star Island. According to ancient chronicles, they brought about the final downfall of the Ponus civilization. Chapter 16. The First Escape from Andromeda. Approximately 30,000 years passed and virtually no records remain. This is likely due primarily to the fact that at that time no starfaring human civilization existed. Later there is rudimentary evidence of newly emerging cultures and smaller empires. In the millennia that followed, there was a slow rise, culminating in the development of faster-than-light space travel, but all contact with non-human races seem to have ended in wars and hostility. An unspecified conflict with a very powerful alien species that had come from another part of the galaxy appears to have finally brought the newly emerging human civilization in the Andromeda galaxy to the brink of annihilation. To avoid extinction, many people decided to leave the star island forever. The records speak of the construction of a fleet of generation ships and a subsequent journey through the void between the galaxies that lasted several millennia. The travelers often spent very long periods in hypersleep chambers, according to lore, with most of them not surviving the endless journey. It is reported that the navigators finally became disoriented in the eternal blackness of the void, and most of the people aboard the ships went insane. The little we know today about this exodus sounds like a nightmare beyond description. The humans who had decided to leave the Andromeda galaxy dared a long journey through the vastness of space. They attempted to bridge the huge distances between the star islands in gigantic generation ships. But for the most of them, these ships became nothing but graves. Chapter 17. Man of the Halo Stars. From over 200 ships, 4 made it to the edge of the Milky Way with their last remaining strange, where they reached a remote halo star. This planet experienced very aggressive solar radiation, what meant that the human settlers had to build underground facilities to survive. In the following period, humans managed to build at least primitive spaceships and reached other stars in the Milky Way's halo belt. There are some records that report that the settlers also sent research probes into the depths of the Milky Way, with the disappointing result that none of the probes was able to detect any signals of human origin. This could be the reason why the men of the halo stars never tried to advance towards the core regions of the Milky Way. The following 10,000 years saw only the slow demise of the small civilization of human colonists. In the barren star systems of the halo belt, hardly offered favorable conditions for a culture. Added to this were growing internal conflicts among the colonists, which ultimately culminated in several wars. Some of the populated worlds were contaminated with radiation and became uninhabitable. Thus, there was no longer any hope for the colonists from the Andromeda Galaxy. Venerable Master, there are almost no sources that give us a more detailed insight into the civilization of the halo star humans. This may have been due to the fact that this forgotten culture had lost contact with other fragments of humanity. However, it is almost certain that nothing remains of this hapless civilization today. The inhabitants of the halo star colonies had regressed to a rather primitive level of technology. Hostile conditions and internal disunity on their homeworlds did the rest to bring about the downfall of this civilization. No one hears the lamentations of the hopeless in the endless depths of space. They are forgotten, and only I still speak of them. I try to imagine how they suffered and despaired, but I cannot, Venerable Master, for I cannot think and feel like a human being. Chapter 18. The Fire Throwers. Nevertheless, there was still hope elsewhere, for humanity had left traces in the Andromeda Galaxy. Although they were barely visible, it didn't change the fact that they existed. On a forgotten planet called Vanar, a tiny population of human colonists had survived and laid the foundations for a new civilization. Here we find the first evidence about 140 years after the disappearance of the halo star settlers at the edge of the Milky Way. After experiencing the usual teething problems of civilization, establishing states, industries, and finally initial space travel efforts, humans began to explore the neighboring solar systems. This human tribe called itself Spurlanai, which in their own language meant something like fire throwers. The little we know about the Purlanai culture suggests that internal wars and constant conflict must have been a central part of it. Like so many humans who later created admirable civilizations, the Purlanai had been barbarians for a long time, constantly fighting each other. This seems to be a fundamental trait of the human species, if I may make this remark, Venerable Master. I will refrain from giving a precise description of the Purlanai's appearance at this point, as they are your direct ancestors, Venerable Master. Of course, there have been some genetic changes in your population over the last millennia, but I certainly agree with you when you say that your people bear an enormous resemblance to the ancient Devas, and that the Purlanai are probably the purest descendants of these magnificent humans. Also, we no longer have genetic samples from the ancient devas for comparison. I trust your judgment. Sources report that during the initial phase of their expansion in the Bona spiral arm, the Purlanai encountered the ruins of several extraterrestrial races but did not encounter any non-human beings. Apparently, this can at least be assumed as there had been devastating wars among the alien races over the past millennia, leaving behind a multitude of depopulated worlds. There were also no traces of other humans. Approximately 2000 years after developing a faster-than-light drive, the Purlanai encountered a non-human species for the first time. They called them Goblam, and they are described in the sources as large and slug-like. This description fits the few pictorial representations of these creatures that have survived. Some xenobiologists claim that the Goblam could be a subspecies of the Hatta, but this cannot be proven. The contact with the Goblam was mostly peaceful, and through an exchange of cultural goods and technologies, the Purlanai learned that their ancestors originally came from the neighboring Milky Way. Over the next millennia, the Purlanai continued to expand. Also, their expansion was hampered by long-running quarrels between rival warrior castes. Nevertheless, contact with other alien races did occur, which, with few exceptions, ended without military conflicts. All in all, despite their martial name, the Purlanai seem to have been not only good fighters, but also skilled diplomats, and their friendly relations with various alien races are repeatedly mentioned in the records. Among the mentioned rulers, it is Zurich, the balanced dancer on the star's light. This should be the correct translation of his name, Venerable Master, who was the father of the ideology of being kind to the non-human being, which was the foundation of the Purlanai's peaceful rise to a powerful nation in the Sea of Stars. As the Purlanai continued their cosmic expansion, they eventually formed an alliance with several non-human species known as the Blue Confederacy. This alliance became a significant power whose influence extended as far as the core worlds of the Andromeda Galaxy. However, the Purlanai were put to the test in the millennia that followed, as the green-skinned descendants of the Grushlogs, whom the Purlanai called Obraks, continued to expand further into the Bona spiral arm. Several wars between the Blue Confederacy and the invaders followed, but ultimately ended with a crushing defeat for the Purlanai and their allies. Only the lust for violence drives the monstrous Obraks from planet to planet. They came out of the void to lay waste to everything we loved. Our leader Tyram cried in pain when he saw the ruins and the end of his mighty fleet of starbucks. May the eternal spirit complexity of the universe curse the Obraks for all time. It is said in a text fragment from this period. Over the next centuries, the Obrak attacks became so frequent that the Purlanai were forced to abandon more and more planets. Gradually, the Blue Confederacy disintegrated and the Purlanai's power began to crumble. The information we have about the following era, however, is riddled with contradictions. Some evidence suggests that the civilization perished as a result of the Obrak Wars, while other reports massive space quakes and other natural disasters that made life impossible in this part of the spiral arm. In the end, the Perlani fled war and destruction as best as they could. They attempted to establish a new empire on the outskirts of the Andromeda Galaxy, but failed after a few centuries. This image shows an emissary of the Blue Confederacy. The Perlani placed great value on good diplomatic relations with the non-human species of neighboring galactic regions. This policy was successful for a long time. An alien species that was presumably also part of the Blue Confederacy. Unfortunately, the description of the image is no longer decipherable. Please excuse my constant remarks regarding the omnipresent data rot, Venerable Master. The ancestors of the Obraks had already tyrannized humanity for endless millennia. They had spread not only throughout the Milky Way, but also into the Andromeda Galaxy. Wherever these creatures appeared, they brought war and destruction. Chapter 19. No more hope in the Sea of the Stars. As the Perlani watched their civilization crumbling, their spirits sank into an ocean of hopelessness. Religious cults that placed suffering at the core of their teachings spread across the still intact planets of the former Perlani star empire. The most important of these cults was the cult of despair. The mere belief that there could be anything like hope in the Sea of the Stars was declared a sin by the cult's leaders. If existence had any meaning, it was solely that the human soul was tempered by suffering. At this time, a few colonists discovered and explored the ruins of a human civilization on a forgotten planet. It is assumed that these remains were the legacy of settlers from the era of the Ponot culture, but here too the records are not clear. In any case, the colonists discovered extensive facilities beneath the planet's surface, containing sealed and therefore remarkably well-preserved technological relics and even data crystals. One of these data crystals still had an intact quantum cloud which the colonists could access. What they found was largely the story I am currently telling you, Venerable Master. At least the few fragments which had survived the eons behind us, completed by the little we know about our direct ancestors. When the colonists returned to their home planet and presented the relics they had found, they were enthusiastically welcomed. The extraordinary information about the history of humanity was studied with great fascination by the leaders of the cult of despair. They also learned of the existence of the network of warp tunnels which could negate the distances between worlds. The Andromeda Galaxy was cursed and held no place for humanity, the cult leaders finally preached to the masses. Rather, the promised land would be beyond the void in the ancient homeland, the Milky Way. There, too, was Holy Terra, the forgotten mother of the human race, waiting to embrace her lost children again. I think I do not have to tell you all too much about the sermons of prophets like Ilian the seer, Hermon of Grava, or one of the other famous preachers, because you know them all. 3 more millennia of suffering, decay, alien attacks, and ever larger space quakes drove the Purlanai to increasingly believe in the promised galaxy. They thought that their ancestors' abandonment of their sacred homeworld was their original sin. Now, as the followers of the cult of despair warned, they would be punished by the divine powers of the universe through natural disasters and the destruction of their planets. The first followers of the cult of despair meet secretly underground because they were persecuted by the authorities. Later, the cult's teaching spread with ever-increasing speed. These cultists were the traditional make-up of the suffering. The data crystal from the Ponus era, a relic which contained information of immeasurable value. This crystal has allowed us to explore the magnificent history of humanity before it could sink forever into the mists of oblivion. Chapter 20. The Home of Man. Eventually, the surviving humans began to use their remaining resources to build a star fleet to leave the Andromeda galaxy. The construction of the fleet took several centuries and, by its end, had become a religious act for the Purlanai. One day, the humans finally started their great journey and flew toward one of the warp portals. Venerable Master, we all remember well what happened next, because, as we know, the ships came out of the warp not close to the Milky Way, but in the middle of the black void. What shimmered in the distance as a glowing wheel was not the Milky Way, but the Triangulum Galaxy. Thus, we had entered reality over 2 million light years away from the home galaxy of your ancestors. This image shows a procession of believers on their way to one of the gigantic spaceships. Thus began the long journey back to the Milky Way, the home galaxy of your species, Venerable Master. It is still not over. The horrors of space lie behind the fleet of the desperate. Most are no longer with us, but you are still here, my master. We have reached the Milky Way, and its stars light our way back to Earth. Soon it will be done, my old friend. Sleep well and peacefully, for I am by your side. Chapter 21. Mother Earth. But now our journey is almost over, Venerable Master. After such a long time and so much suffering that has befallen us, 7 starships remain. This is all that is left of the fleet of the desperate. The signals we have received so far on our journey through the Milky Way have unfortunately not been of human origin. Perhaps the humans aboard these ships are indeed the last of their kind, as you have already suspected. But no one knows for sure, for the sea of stars is vast, and who can say whether there aren't still humans elsewhere? About 1,000 millennia ago, your ancestors have left their homeworld Terra for the first time, if my calculations are correct. long ago, isn't it, Venerable Master? The coordinates of Earth, which we extracted from the ancient data crystal, are hopefully correct. By now, Mother Terra is not far away anymore. The terrible odyssey through the darkness lays behind us, and our ships once again shine in the light of the suns of the Milky Way. Earth, Venerable Master, is getting closer, which means you will soon learn the ultimate truth. When you awaken from your sleep, you will be able to see the holy planet with your own eyes. I hope so much for your sake that it is still there. This world that means so much to you and that was forgotten for so long. I hope it is not dead and dark and cold after all. I hope it still shines in the darkness to welcome you and your people. Even so, I am not a human being, but only your artificial friend and servant. I try to imagine the joy you will feel when we finally reach our goal. But now, Venerable Master, go on dreaming your own dream again. You know the aeons-old legends from the beginning of time, my dreaming friend. We have both heard them 1,000 times. Mother Earth was a blue sphere full of beauty and grace. I too wish so much that it is still like this, especially for you and the others. I admire you humans. You have the ability to hope and believe beyond all logic. Perhaps that's the reason you still exist.